It is a public meeting. It is being live streamed. Is that correct, James? Thank you very much. And you'll find us on the Council's YouTube channel. If I take us to the agenda then, so item 1, any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. Item 4, I am the Chair of Broadland Living.
I also...
Chair, Director even.
I also am a Director of Broadland Living, so when we get to the point where we're talking about Broadland Living, Natasha and I will not be voting on those points, okay? So just to make clear on that. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We don't have any apologies, Chair.
I think I have one. Sorry, that's my fault. I haven't passed on, have I? Yes, Councillor Riley. He may be able to be here, but if he does, he will be late. Thank you. Right, so can I take us on to item 3 then? That is the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 13th of February 2024. You'll find them on page 7. Are we all happy with those minutes? Does anybody have any comments that they want to make from those minutes? Lovely, thank you very much. In that case, let's go to the public speaking. Do we have any public speaking, James?
There's no public speaking, Chair.
No. Okay.
Jo Cox.
She's a member.
Oh, sorry, just came in.
Okay, in that case, I'll take us to item 5, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, if the Chairman would like to give us an update. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I wince at any point, it's to do with my back, not due to anything you will have said. I thought it was an excellent meeting. I have to say there was a lot of excellent questioning from almost every single member. I think made a contribution at some point. And I'll go into individual points I can talk about, which are not below the line. The Strategic Performance Risk and Finance Report, people welcomed that. There were some questions. One councillor noted there were 12 areas that were declining. It doesn't necessarily mean they were changing in colour, but they were in decline. And I know that it was reported that interventions have been put in place to deal with those issues and to monitor them closely, but that's something which we may want to monitor further throughout the year. There was a question about the discrepancy in the percentage on the bills that were going out, which I know the finance member was, or finance lead was going to look into and find out exactly what that related to, or whether that was just a misunderstanding. There was a question about the fact that everyone seemed to be getting paper bills. Almost all members present were receiving paper bills and not the internet bills that had previously been the case. We're not quite sure whether that was just coincidental or whether some hiccup in the system had happened, meaning that more paper bills were going out than had previously been the case. There are also questions about when you have measure on what is on staff retention. I think we all have different views about what is a good percentage, because you could argue that staff moving on is actually a sign of a successful organisation, sometimes in that they're building and creating people that other employers would happily take on, and that in turn sometimes makes your organisation look very much an organisation that people want to join, because it looks like you're building people, but it can also look conversely like a bad figure, like you're losing staff. So some of those measures are hard to measure about whether they are good or bad, even if they appear to be in decline. On the adoption of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, everybody was grateful that this was finally coming through. We might finally have a solution to the 5-year land supply issue, which seems to have been ongoing on and off for, well, zoom in on the wrong place now in the hall, so the camera will go to probably be showing the top of my head, so I'll move back. On the nutrient neutrality issue, I think everybody was impressed at the speed at which this had been dealt with. I know Rodney tried to give credit when we paid him credit, but he actually credited the whole team for the excellent work that had been done on that. And there is a lot of praise really to be had by officers, the way that they've worked on this so quickly and really led on an issue where so many councils have also had the opportunity to lead, but we are taking a lead on that. And finally, believe that's all. There's one more before we came to below the line. We just felt that the strategic asset management framework was a sensible plan. There were some questions asked about what things were measured, but I think all answers were given as to why there were some very high figures which seemed to not make sense initially because they valued properties at different rates, but then we realised that what all the assets actually equated to. And I will come back very briefly later on to anything that was after the exclusion of press and public, but all matters were resolved with everybody voting fully in agreement to support all the items that went through.
Lovely, thank you very much. That's very reassuring, isn't it? Thank you for that. Then, in that case, can I move us to item 6, which is representations from non-cabinet members? And Jo, I think you had your hand.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. Just looking at the Q3 Strategic Performance Risk and Finance report, it's really disappointing to see that we're 341,000 over budget with the cost pressure on core services. At the last council meeting, we did say that we adopted full cost recovery, and just looking at the figures, I understand we spent 100,000 on car parks, and that was agreed in September. So I'm wondering parking strategy, and I'd like to know when that's coming forward, please. It's really disappointing that external funding to support growth is down. Our main reason for collaboration with South Norfolk was to put a growth delivery team together and sort of go fairly aggressively for growth and money towards growth. So that is hugely disappointing. And I'd like to see the growth delivery team delivering more than the small amount of inward investment that they seem to have found. So I think that's really disappointing. On strategic asset management, I noticed that Carrowbreck House has now been renamed Business Support Centre. So I don't know where that decision was made, and it's also a training centre. Carrowbreck is also the backup site for our IT recovery. It's also our disaster recovery centre, or has been. And I noticed in next year's budget, Cobb Lodge is now the new IT backup centre, and that's costing us 27,000. So perhaps we could look harder at the figures in IT. Also, in the strategic management, asset management, I notice there are 3 offices, and I have asked about that. And I understand the Broadland Food Innovation Centre is included in that, which I find very, very surprising, because these are commercial units. They're not offices. They're 13 incubator units. I'm sure your cabinet is familiar with that, so I'm quite surprised that is logged together with officers. Also, the funding around the Broadland Food Innovation Centre, I think it would be very prudent to keep that separate. So I'd be interested to know your answers on these, Chair. Thank you.
There's quite a lot in there, Jo. So I'm sure some of those things will become clear as we talk them through. I think some of those things you might not be quite right about. I'm not at all sure about Carrowbreck House being renamed or anything along those lines, but no doubt I'll ask Debbie if she's willing to give us an opinion on that.
So yes, what it is it's a classification in the final accounts. We've just lifted that table from the final accounts, and it's classified in there as a business support centre. So no, we haven't renamed it at all. It's just the classification. And also the Food Innovation Centre, again, it's just a classification in the final accounts, which has been classified under offices, and I'm sure that we can have another look at that, but it's pure classification. It's included in the final accounts, that's all.
So I think what we're talking about here is this is under the asset management. It was quite long, so I got a bit, wasn't quite sure which part we were referring to, but under the asset management thing, that's where it's coming in, the category. So it's not about the name of it, that's about where it's being categorised in terms of how we manage those assets, yeah? But I'm sure we'll come to that a bit more as we go forward. I think I need to move us on now, Joe, so...
it would be really helpful if, rather than speak at
This isn't a council meeting though, is it, Joe? This is a cabinet meeting. If you want to raise things extra when they come to council, that's fine. But this is a cabinet meeting and the rules have always been the same. You know, you're entitled to make a representation and that's fine, and I've heard those. Obviously, if you want to approach us about anything outside of this meeting, that's fine as well. I'm more than happy for you to do that, and I'm more than happy to chat about it. But in this meeting, this is the structure of how it works. So I think we'll stick to that, okay? In that case, if I move us on to item 7 then, which will be the Strategic Performance, Risk and Finance Report, and possibly some of those things that have been mentioned will come up again, and we can discuss those around the table here, and hopefully we'll get to some sort of clarity about what we're talking about in terms of finance. Is that you, Rodney, presenting that, I think, is it? Oh, Darren, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. So the report we're about to present gives an overview of the Council's Q3 position for strategic performance, risk and finance. I'm just going to highlight a few key points in the finance section before handing over to Debbie, who's going to talk through the strategic performance and risk elements of the report. So at the end of December, BDC were facing a number of inflationary and demand pressures on the cost of core services, and that total pressure is £341,000 over the whole of those services. This is offset by buoyant investment income due to the council having higher cash balances and those investments are attracting higher interest rates than we would have expected. For the capital finance, at the end of December, BDC had spent £9.6 million on capital schemes in the year to date, with an expected forecast outturn of £13.69 million. The report in the appendices details the variances across each service delivery area. There's an additional recommendation on the report to request and agree to a purchase of a further 49,900 £1 shares in Broadland Living to bring the total equity investment of the company to £50,000. I'll stop there for any questions on the finance section of the report.
Lovely, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or options to talk about? Steve, do you have something you want to add to that?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry for being a couple of minutes there. Yeah, the issue in regards to the £341,000 was clearly inflationary pressures. As you know, the original inflation forecast back in 22 moving forward to set in the previous budget were actually lower than what turned out to be the case during 23-24. So those inflationary pressures on the core services, as with all councils, have had an effect. In actual fact, work was done during this period of time to ensure that figure was as low as possible. It would have actually been higher. So work was done to bring that down as far as possible, and as has been indicated as well, by yourself, the 341 has been covered by investment income, which has been very, very helpful. I think just moving forward, though, in terms of the capital issues that the council face and the previous commitment to use the reserves for that, we clearly do have issues in regards to that, and therefore we do need to keep a focus on that moving forward to the next quarter. And I think that if we can do that, then we will see some sort of positive result for the next quarter in trying to keep some of those pressures off in that regard as well. There is also recommendations I see here in relation to the risks, which I'm absolutely happy with, is the portfolio, the finance holder, and 49,000, which is under recommendation 4, having gone through this with the directors of Broadland Living, etc. We do need some extra additional working capital in there. There was various figures, 25 at one point, then 49. We need some additional working capital because, as you know, when you bring in the business and you've just set it up, we will have some cash flow moving forward, issues to resolve. So this is actually a bare minimum working capital to see us through as we're getting LHF houses on stream. There's another 2, as you know, in the offing at the moment. So that's very much in support of that business to make sure that it's working appropriately. I think that's about it from me, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. I think if there's a comment I was going to make, I think that's pretty much what you're alluding to, isn't it, Steve? That you know, when you get high costs because of inflation, you also get high income because you get your investment. So effectively, we're balancing out there. And but absolutely, it's something that it's important that we focus on and make sure that we're getting the best value, however we do that. Debbie, you were going to do the risk bit, weren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the performance is reported up to the end of December, covering quarter 3. It remains a positive picture. We've got 18 green, 5 amber and 3 red. To provide an overview of the red indicators, there's one about the consolidated demand on the housing, including the homelessness prevention work and housing register. We continue to see pressure relating to homelessness, although it is less than the previous quarter 2. This is because at quarter 3 it tends to cover the Christmas period where homelessness demand tends to always slow a little. Prevention work continues, but demand is increasing and significantly higher than the previous year, as we know, due to the economic factors. Also securing private rent and household affordability issues remain. The second red indicator is external funding to support growth. We've always performed well in securing external funding, but at the time of writing the report, the indicator was red. However, we've recently received significant funding relating to nutrient neutrality work for the Norfolk, on behalf of Norfolk districts. So this figure here will be much higher at the year end and will be green and represented in the next quarter report. And then the final red indicator is the staff retention. We have seen a small decrease of 1.45% compared to Q2, and if the current average rate of turnover continues, we're going to miss our target of 10% turnover, with a year-end forecast figure set to be 15.48%. But we are obviously the measures influenced by the labour market, but work does continue in-house to better understand exit feedback. We're getting much better feedback now from those exit interviews, and we're continuing to make continual improvements there. Happy to take any questions on performance, or happy to go on to the risk.
Thank you, Chair. It's around the staff retention measure, and I think that the question is kind of where the 90% target figure comes from. We always like to have challenging targets, not easy ones to meet. Wondering a little bit about the science behind that. And in terms of where we are with staff retention, what is a healthy level of staff retention? Because I think the figures that we're seeing is certainly not unhealthy. It probably comes within the healthy range. It's just difficult, I think, to see where you should be pinpointing it, because you are looking for people to develop their careers, and when people develop their careers, they move on. You are looking at people who make lifestyle choices at the other end of their careers, and look to move on for those reasons. So I'm interested in just a bit more narrative around where we come from with that figure. And I'd also be interested to know, I think it's excellent that we're getting greater uptake on staff exit interviews. That shows that we're doing something right. Unhappy staff tend not to fill in the staff exit interviews, as to whether there are any particular trends coming through from those.
So just to pick up those points, the first one in terms of the 10% and where was that set, that is, you're right, Councillor Roper, that is historic. It was a target that was set when the one team joined together as part of the performance metrics. I think it probably is due a review. I think when you look at turnover nationally and across the board, 15% is starting to be a bit more of the norm. There's a number of reasons for that, and I hate what I'm about to say with a passion. The younger generation, I can't believe I'm saying that, look at work very, very differently. It isn't a career for life, it's a work for 18 months, 2 years, then move on to the next thing and move around. So, and we are seeing that come through with our staff, so I think we need to recognise that. I think whilst we're a reasonably sized organisation, we're not big enough at a senior level, so we will see staff moving on for promotion because there is a bit of a ceiling with us, and we're seeing that play through. But they're good leavers. They're leaving. I think of Faye as my head of internal audit. She's gone on to be head of internal audit for a charity globally. You know, she's gone on to fly and seeing that kind of work its way through. But I think in terms of the 10%, I think it would be very challenging for us to meet that, and it probably is due a review and a discussion around whether we think that's achievable. In terms of the benchmarking, it's really difficult. We're one of the only councils that actually report on this publicly, and to try and get that information from other councils is really quite difficult. We do get information from the LGA, but that's 2 years out of date by the time we get it. So we compare as much as we can from data that we can get access to in the HR world, and I would say we're there or thereabouts. And I think, personal view, I think that 15% is quite a healthy turnover. It gives the retention of knowledge, it enables staff to grow and develop, but it also enables staff to move on in their careers. And then in terms of the exit interviews, we are now at 85% response on those, which I think is really encouraging. Anecdotally, the 15% said, I don't feel I need to, I'm quite happy leaving, I don't feel I need to give any feedback one way or another. That is anecdotally. And what we're tending to see is what I've just described, that move and that progression kind of up through, or the younger generation going, right, I've done my couple of years, I'm going to go and try somewhere else now. But I will, in the Q4, I think I said it, overview and scrutiny through the chair, that I'll give some more detail on the reason for that exit interview so you can see those categories played through in more detail.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say a similar thing, actually. Where you would have had a job for life, or you're looking for that sort of career, I think things have changed quite dramatically now, haven't they? So I do think that reviewing those targets is probably a good thing to be doing, and that might help us, meet those risk elements as well. I'm very pleased to see about the exit interviews, because I think when I was part of overview and scrutiny, we were looking at those things and we were quite disappointed to see how hard it was to get people to do those. So I think that's quite a major improvement, actually, to get to 85%. So I'm really encouraged by that. Trevor, you had something you want to add, did you?
Chair, if I could, just in terms of our ability to recruit, it's proven to be quite outstanding. So in a market that is really tight, we've recently recruited 4 senior planners who are like the proverbial hen's teeth. We've recently undertaken a recruitment following the retirement of our IT manager and recruited an extremely high quality individual to fill that role from a field of high quality candidates. And equally, to further demonstrate the point, Phil is now benefiting from 2 really high calibre people who have joined George's team in terms of economic development. And to pick up on the point that was made around staff survey, the staff survey had an overwhelmingly high participation rate, which is giving us really good feedback to shape the culture of the organisation going forward. So it's good that this is being monitored and scrutinised by members. It wouldn't be the area of gravest concern, I would suggest.
Thank you. My comment would be less about the organisation and more about one of the issues that we face is the red target for housing. And that is a massive issue for this country. It's not just for Broadland, it's across the country. Having been to the DCN conference recently, that's all district councils are talking about, the problems we face with housing, whether that's for homelessness or for people who can't afford to get private rents or whatever that might be. That is an issue that's really going to be hard to deal with, and I think that's a challenge for us as a council. It's a challenge for all councils. I do think Broadland is doing quite well, and obviously it's something we won't take our eye off. But it's going to be, you know, that needs to be a red target because it's a red target across the country, and I think that we have to bear that in mind. Now, Steve, you wanted to say something, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just on this point about where you set the target, you know, 10%, 11%, 12%, whatever. And I do understand the point that's being made about large corporations. Two previous large corporations I was involved, we had 0.5%. There's reasons for that because of the nature of those people want to move on, they had progression, etc. So we was able to, we only had a 0.5% turnover, and that was largely due to retirement. But the issue here is for me, just a bit more sort of clarification. I know we went through this previously, and that you mentioned it, Sue, time and task panel in our day. We'd also asked for a breakdown. I'm not suggesting this is done in terms of a regular report or anything. I was just wondering if Emma, if you'd also had any indications, and Trevor, around within the various departments. So, for instance, do we have a 10% figure within rev and benefits, for instance, you know, the frontline people? And do we have a higher figure for people, say managers or under managers, that to do have within those different categories, you know, different sub-targets, so to speak? Thank you.
Yeah, so on that point, we cut the data in lots of different ways. So assistant directors have their cut of data for their service areas, but we overlay that with other information in terms of staff survey, staff sickness, so that they can look at all of the data and see actually is there an underlying something we need to look at. So we look at the data in that way. We look at the data by grade level, and we look at the data, as I said, by service area. So we cut it in lots of different ways so that if we're seeing certain trends in certain areas, then we can start to delve into that. Has the data been timely and readily available on the old HR and payroll system? No, it's been really clunky and difficult to get it out and time consuming. Will it be better on the new system moving forwards? Absolutely. So we'll get some much richer data out of that as well moving forwards.
Okay, thank you. I think we've done enough on that, haven't we? I think we all identify there are three main risks that we're concerned about. I think we're all aware of what they are and that we need to keep an eye on those. I think it's quite reassuring to see how many green ones there are. I'll let a little bit of a positive here. I think that's quite good. And I also think getting the funding for the neutrality has been quite a big thing for us. So again, I think that's a good thing that we can talk about. I'd like to move us to the recommendations. I think on this one, we are talking about, there are 4 recommendations. The fourth one, which is the shares in Broadland Living, I'm going to step back from that briefly because I think as a director that's not really for me to influence that in any way. So I'm going to just ask Cabinet, are we happy to agree 1 to 3? And then I will leave those who are not directors to look at item 4. So are we all happy with items 1 to 3, recommendations 1 to 3? Yes, okay then. So then I will hand over to Dan. Perhaps you could look at rep number 4.
Thank you. My moment of glory stepping into the chair just for this one item. Are we all happy with item 4? Those in favour, please indicate.
Agreed.
All agreed. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So thank you, Darren and Debbie. Turn my page. Which brings us to item 8, which is the adoption of the Greater Norwich Local Plan. So that's Mike will be stepping forward, I believe, to tell us all about that. Thank you.
Thank you. The recommendations of the Cabinet report can be boiled down to recommend that Cabinet recommends that Council adopts the local plan. That's the key point. Now, we've been working on this local plan for a long period now, for 7 to 8 years. Can I just refer you first of all to the very conclusion of the Cabinet report? That's on page 92, paragraph 7.9. I'll start with this and then go into a little bit more detail. Having received a highly positive inspector's report endorsing the strategy and site allocation set out in the plan, and taking account of the significant benefits of adoption, the case for adoption is overwhelming. So that's our recommendation that the plan should be adopted. Now I just want to go a little bit more into why that recommendation is made. So, and just to remind you first of all that the plan can only be adopted with the main modifications that the inspectors require. Now, going through some of the key points about why we recommend adoption. So first of all areas, all local planning authorities must have a national planning policy framework compliant local plan adopted by December 2026. It's a requirement. And yeah, we've worked on this for a number of years. We're well placed now to meet that requirement. Secondly, many of our current local plan documents run out in 2026. Although the Greater Norwich Local Plan will not replace the area action plans, the Growth Triangle Area Action Plan, it won't replace Broadland's development management policies, and it won't replace neighbourhood plans. But the joint core strategy, the current strategy, will run out, so it does need replacing. Thirdly, the review, having achieved this review of a joint core strategy, of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, of a joint strategy, this is a considerable success. We're only the second joint plan nationally to be reviewed. Working together in partnership is difficult, it's hard work, but we've done a very good job. Broadland working with Norwich, South Norfolk and the county and with the Broads Authority to progress this plan to the point where we can adopt it. My fourth point, plan-led joint working provides greater certainty for economic investment in our area. That's from the private sector, but also accessing national funding streams as well. So having the strategy in place will assist us with getting investment in the area. The next point, it represents continuity. We've worked together for since the early 2000s on joint planning, and we have this joint strategic approach. It is the best thing for Broadland to work with Norwich and South Norfolk because of the functional geography of our area. Our economies are linked to each other. Next, it supports strategic growth, thriving communities, and the enhancement of infrastructure and services. So when we were doing the consultations, we heard very regularly, okay, we need the housing, we accept that, but we need the infrastructure to go with it. This plan provides for the infrastructure to go with it. Refer you to Appendix 1 at the end of the plan, and that has a list of the infrastructure required. And we work through joint work with Norwich and South Norfolk and through spending a SIL to provide that infrastructure. Now, this is probably the key change that be of most interest. The recent changes to the National Planning Policy Framework mean that on adoption of this plan, there will be a fixed 5-year land supply for the next 5 years until 2029. So that's a key thing, key issue that's changed, and that's recently changed. So a fixed 5-year land supply. And then my final point is there's been significant time and money spent on this plan, although the 7 to 8 years, recent research has shown that is about the average for producing a local plan. There is discussion of speeding this up. It's likely that there will be new legislation in the autumn that will speed up plan making. But we need to benefit from considerable success we've had from this joint working. So just to summarise, the recommendation is that Cabinet should recommend to Council the plan should be adopted.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yes, I have to say, when I read the report and I saw it said 7 years, I thought, crikey, that's a long time, isn't it? And then realised it's actually the average, so we're not unusual in that. It's a massive amount of work, and I pay tribute to everybody who's been involved in it over the last 7 years, because it has been a huge block of work to be done. And I think we all agree that it's very important that we work together on this, because some of these things cross boundaries. They cross our invented boundaries, if you like, don't they? So I think it's a good thing that we're working together, and I think we have different elements of each area which we can put forward into this. So I'm very happy with this, but has anybody got any questions or comments they want to make about the Greater Norwich Local Plan before we adopt it? Yes, Stuart.
Just to say, Chair, that I agree with you. 7 years is a long time. I understand that there is some suggestion that the next one may not take quite as long, but can I say, hope springs eternal. But we're already into the foothills of the next plan, so you know, we are getting on with it, and hopefully the next one will not take as long, albeit that you know, some of us may not be here to see the fruition of those works. Thank you.
Jan.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mike, for presenting the report. I'd just like to say that, as you said, it is a requirement to have a local plan, so you know, we do need to support it. I think we need to recognise the challenges ahead, and we have talked about the difficulty in terms of housing and homelessness. We're looking at affordable housing within this plan, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to meet those targets, but clearly that is going to be a very important challenge for us to be able to meet those targets. But I think we ought to, as a council, try and ensure that there is truly affordable housing available. I think comments I've had in terms of the local plan around future energy efficiency of housing has been important, and has been I think significant in terms of the consultation and the comments that have been made. I appreciate that actually building regulations is going to have quite an influence on that, and so that's something that we will be looking to clearly comply with and improve upon, given that we need to look at carbon emissions, we need to look at energy efficiency going forward. And then another very important issue, and that was highlighted, and both Mike and myself was to the East of England Water Summit recently, where water supply is going to be a real challenge for us in the East of England, in particular in Norfolk. And so water efficiency being a key aspect of our buildings going forward, both household and non-household. And that's something that certainly will be a challenge as well. So a number of challenges ahead, but we need to support the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We're certainly in a position where we now need to adopt this plan, as do all of the councils. I think one of the concerns which might come to some members is that they might want to pick up some of the details in terms of perhaps individual sites within their own wards. And I think the message is that as far as the development of the plan, we are well past that stage, quite honestly, and to pick away at the details at this stage is like trying to take ingredients out after it's been baked. And we're at the stage now where the plan has to be passed, it has gone through the inspectorate, and I endorse the recommendations.
Thank you. Yes, I think the point is, as Mike has quite rightly said, you know, the options are we adopt it or you're stuffed, basically. We need this 5-year land supply. This has been thoroughly worked through. We're all happy to recommend this to council for adoption, I think. So if I will just check with everybody else, but that's, yes, lovely. Thank you. So we will be recommending that this gets adopted at our next meeting. Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, so that will take us on to something that's sort of very much related, I would suggest, to planning, is the Norfolk Nutrient Mitigation Fund. Thank you very much. Not Rodney.
Thank you, Chair. This is very much a follow-up report to that considered by Cabinet on the 16th of January of this year. You may recall that actually we submitted an expression of interest back in May 2023 to Government for funding to help support nutrient mitigation work. The council was successful in being awarded 9.6 million of capital funding and £622,000 of revenue funding to support this work, and it's very much to Broadland to work in partnership with the other planning authorities that are affected most by this issue. So the five relevant planning authorities are obviously ourselves as the accountable body for this funding, Broadland Council, North Norfolk District Council, Norwich City Council and South Norfolk Council. So we've been working together to work up the details of the scheme and the potential governance arrangements for this money. And the report before you today very much sets out this detail. So what the report is very much doing is suggesting that we set up this fund and seek expressions of interest from any interested party in order to unlock nutrient mitigation in the relevant catchment areas. And the report is very much looking to set up two schemes. One is a feasibility scheme where people with potential schemes can come forward with assistance to help develop their schemes to make sure they can have a scheme that is actually deliverable. Once we've got a scheme that's potentially deliverable, they can then come and apply for funding for the actual main capital funding for help support develop these schemes. So the idea, if it's approved, we very much look to formally launch this fund and these schemes from April 24 with a formal launch event potentially scheduled for May of this year. Obviously, we're talking about some significant schemes and significant programmes of work. Still, this report is very much suggesting we set up two key working groups, one at an officer level and very much the more strategic one at that member level, very much so that when we get bids in to actually fund schemes, this can be considered by the five authorities in order to come up with recommendations as to which schemes to fund going forward. However, the funding has been awarded to Broadland as accountable body, so any actual decision to award the money at the end will need to come back and be agreed by Broadland as an accountable body, and therefore that's why we've got the recommendations in this report very much saying any final decision on awarding a fund would need to be taken by this council, taking due regard of the consideration of the member working group. I think it's also worth pointing out that very much this 9.6 million is seen as a revolving fund of investment. So you invest it in a scheme, the scheme will then actually deliver nutrient credits which can be sold on to developers in order to unlock housing growth. Once those credits have been sold, the developer or the landholder will have the money to pay back to the council, which we can then invest in further schemes. So very much this is a revolving fund to develop nutrient mitigation schemes for the council. In the longer term, when nutrient mitigation as funding is no longer required, this money can then be returned in order to actually fund measures to improve habitat site restoration in the longer term. So very much overall this report is for yourselves to consider the proposals in front of you, and hopefully if agreed this will be an important step to actually deliver a scheme that will help unlock housing going forward and very much to support the local plan that you very much just agreed to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney. It's a very concise report. Well done. Anybody want any comments on that before we go any further? Yes, Natasha.
Very quick comment. Am I right in thinking that at ONS you said the interest earned is accessible to us? Thank you.
Yes, so the government has given the £9.6 million in advance, so this is currently sitting in the Broadland bank accounts earning interest. So the suggestion as it was funding for this, that this money should then go back to be used to help support run the scheme and help support that actual the feasibility part of that work. So very much at the moment we're obviously earning a decent rate of interest on 9.6 million, and indeed when we invest to a scheme we would normally expect that scheme to return not only your investment. If you invest £1 million, you expect them to return £1 million and a share of interest or profit on any scheme.
Anybody else?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Jan?
Yeah, just to say, of course, we shouldn't be in this situation in the first place. And it's a classic case, really, of where we really ought to be predicting what's the impact of what we're doing in terms of future impact. It's good that we're being able to mitigate the impact that's being created by various practices that have been employed over decades. But it's I suppose it is that kind of, it is an interesting case study to look at in terms of how much it's costing us in time and effort, money and so on, to be able to then remedy, if you like, the situation that we find ourselves in. You can look at this in terms of carbon emissions as well. But it's good that we've got this scheme because we clearly need to clean up the pollution in our watercourses. And certainly it's really good that we're able to have this funding to be able to invest in this revolving fund.
Okay, thank you. So the point I think we're getting to here is that Broadland has put in the bid. We are holding that money and being responsible for it. I am perfectly happy that we have an officer and a member group to sort how we deal with that, because I think it's really important. All the councils that are involved in it need to have a say in that, need to be involved. We had a meeting of the proposed member group just to talk it through, and I think most councils are quite happy with how we've come up with this. I would heartily recommend it. I think it's very pertinent. We need to get this done. We've had a stalemate on planning for some time now, so I think the fact that we've actually got this funding to help us develop these mitigations is exactly what we need, and we need to push that forward as fast as we can. And I actually think that the way this governance has been worked out is the best way to do that. So I think having that officer team who will be able to drill down into whether these things are feasible and whether they're actually going to work and make those recommendations to the member group, who can then also have their take on it, I think is a good way to take this through and eventually spend that money. But I do think we all need to be aware that this is about, Broadland is the accountable body for that, and we do need to remember that, and we need to be very clear about how we use it. So for me, I think this is a really good document, and I'm more than happy to support it. I'm hoping that that is the case with all the rest of the Cabinet. I'll just check. I will just highlight the fact that there are 6, I think, recommendations altogether. The ones I particularly want to highlight are the recruitment of the Nutrient Mitigation Fund Manager, which will be funded from the funding. If you see what I mean, there's too many fundings in there, aren't there? It will be funded from the funding. And the other one is that the Cabinet recommends to full Council to add 9.6 million to the BDC capital programme. So we just need to remember that's not our money, that's the money for the fund, just so we know what we're doing with it. So I'll just highlight that for you. Are we all happy with those recommendations? We support those? Yes? Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so that brings us on to item 10. Oh, Debbie, you're back. Yes, Strategic Asset Management Framework. Thank you. Where you go.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, what's before you is a proposed strategic asset management framework. It's the first time the council's had one, but in recent years our asset base has grown considerably, with temporary accommodation, with Broadland Business Park, with the Food Innovation Centre, etc. So much so that we've now got over £29 million worth of fixed assets, of property, land and property assets at 31st of March last year. Obviously they'll be revalued again in this year's accounts. So before you is the proposed framework. It's made up of 3 elements: an asset management policy, which starts on page 206. Particularly there's 6 principles there which set out how we propose to manage the assets, and then they're fleshed out a bit further down. On page 209 is the strategic asset management strategy itself. And there's a table in there showing the breakdown of the £29 million taken from the accounts. And then there's an asset management working action plan on page 218. That's very much a working document. That's a live document, and that will change over the course of the next few years. It's based on the delivery plan and capital programme, which we recently signed off in February. And obviously, as new schemes come on and schemes go off, that will be a living working document there. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make? Yes, Dan?
Thank you. I think it's absolutely right that the council adopts a strategic asset management framework, as you've said, for the first time. As it is the first time, it might well be something which we refine and develop as time goes on. And my only question really is, from your sense as an officer, sort of what sort of time frame, if we review all of our policies periodically, would you anticipate that we'll maybe be coming back to this one? Or if further down the line any members think there are any I's or T's that need a little bit more attention?
Unless there's any specific changes in the guidance that comes out, obviously if there's new guidance, this one's been based on the latest available guidance from both RICS, the Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and also SITFA. Obviously if that changes, I would definitely say we need to bring it back, but if that doesn't, then I would say at least sort of in 4 years time, Leah, the term of office, and then bring it back there, unless of course there's any specific change in direction from yourselves as members in terms of how you want to manage our assets going forward. So, but yes, absolutely, it does need to be reviewed from time to time.
And I guess the valuations in there as well, they are of the time when they're made, aren't they? And of course they will need to be reviewed from time to time as well. So I think we all accept that and recognise that will be done in a suitable time frame, presumably. Anybody else got any comment they'd like to make on that one?
Apart from to completely endorse, completely fully support this document and the plan, and it does need updating as we go. That's the whole idea of the plan. So strategic reviews of the strategic assets are necessary, and of course we can carry on fine tuning that as we go. But to have the assets listed is appropriate. It's in line with the government recommendations as well, and then to constantly do a review of their value as well. It's quite important to the council. So fully endorse this, Chair.
Okay then, in that case, I'll take us to the recommendations, which are that the Cabinet agrees to recommend to Council the adoption of the Strategic Asset Management Framework, and I'm sure we're all happy to agree that. Yep, lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us to item 11, which is the forward plan on page 224. I've just drawn on the desk. I'm very sorry about that. Okay, so have we all got those? Page 224, you've got the framework there. All right. I think it's all fairly self-explanatory, isn't it? We've been through March. I don't know. I'm looking at 225. Has anybody got any comments they want to make about anything on the forward plan or the time frame? No. In that case, we'll just note the forward plan. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry. Fatal flaw. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006